Welcome to Talks with Tracy, with certified hypnotherapist, life coach, and licensed mental health professional, Tracy Claremont. Tracy will share her healing journey and explore the many meaningful alternative healing methods in our world today that will support you in doing your own deepest emotional healing. So please welcome the host of Talks with Tracy, Tracy Claremont. Let the suffering end and the healing begin.
Hello and welcome to Talks with Tracy. I'm your host, Tracy Claremont, coming to you live on the Bold Brave Television Network. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to listen to this podcast. And thank you also to Bold Brave Television, as always, for having me. Now, if you've watched my podcast before, you know that this is a place where deep, meaningful, emotional healing, the kind of true healing that puts an end to suffering, is encouraged, inspired, is demonstrated in the most meaningful of ways in an effort to show all of you that it is available to everyone. Each and every one of you have this available to you. So in my own healing, I've talked about how I have learned to follow that which I'm compelled towards, follow that which unfolds for me. And today's amazing guest came to me in just that way. One day after I had done my own show, I found myself with a cancellation of a client. So I had extra time. I was doing things on my computer, and I noticed a show coming up on Bold Brave Television called That's All I Know So Far with Kat Schwartz. And I felt myself drawn to watch that. Now, I don't normally watch podcasts during the course of my work day because I don't have a lot of time. But on this day, it all happened to where I did have that time available, and her show was right at the time I had available. And I was compelled to watch, so I did, and I'm so glad that I did. So what I found was an incredibly like-minded podcaster who's sharing her own healing journey for the sake of helping others, just like we do here. And as I watched her podcast, I'm like, oh my gosh, I really want her on my show to share her story. You know, she talked about, well, her first show, I watched her first show as well, and she talked about suicide and her own experience with suicidality. And these are hard things to talk about. And I believe that was part of the reason I was drawn to her show and to her as well, because the issue of suicide is actually just very close to my heart. I have myself been hugely and directly impacted by suicide in my own lifetime. Now, I have considered sharing my own experience around suicide on my podcast. However, I do recognize that I'm not quite to the point of healing around those experiences to be able to really share my experience without sobbing and ugly crying and have a little breakdown. And I don't know how helpful that would be to everybody. And I always want to be helpful. So I know that this isn't really yet the time for me to share that. I do believe I will get there. And one day I will do a whole podcast on my own personal experience with suicide. But I do know that today is not the day for me to share at that level. So when I heard Kat telling her story, first off, an incredible story of moving from suffering to healing. I wanted her to share that. And secondly, I thought maybe this is a safe way for me to address this issue, a very important issue, in a safe manner that won't cause me to have a big breakdown. Yay. So, she tells her story, again, from a place of suffering where, as she describes, and I quote, a lifelong sense of worthlessness met with utter hopelessness. And that was where the suicidality happened. I thought that was a beautiful way to describe that. And then she went through various treatments, some helpful, some not helpful, and then brought herself all the way around to an awakening in which she came to understand the value of spiritual healing and the healing power of energy, and then shifted her career path as a result. So, Kat Schwartz, amazing. She's here today. She's a physical therapist turned energy healer. She is a Reiki Master of Masters, a gifted medium, and a spiritual teacher. She says she does spiritual private investigative services. Oh my gosh, That is so cool. And she has a business called Compassionate Healing Services, which really shows how she joins with people from a place of kindness and love and compassion to encourage and guide healing. And she has her very own show on Bold Brave Television Network called That's What I Know So Far. So, enough from me. Let's hear from her. Please join me in welcoming the beautiful and amazing Kat Schwartz.
Hi,
Yay!
Tracy. Thank you for that
Hi.
introduction. It was lovely. Hi.
Oh, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you. You and I have talked about how, we just, it's so interesting to me how so many people um, come to similar knowings, but have different
Mm,
journeys, like different paths or ways that they got there, but came to the same place. And that's what I really saw in you when I was listening to your podcasts and whatnot. And I loved the way that you just so genuinely and openly were willing to share your story, even talking about going to a place of suicidality that is a hard topic, or it's a hard thing for people to share. I think a lot of people can talk about suicide prevention and whatnot, but when you share your story of how you actually came to that place and how you came out of it, it's a little different.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is, and hopefully I get through it without ugly crying. But I do believe that I am in a healed enough place to do so, and I appreciate your reverence to your own healing process. I just want to say that, and knowing what you're
Oh
ready to
yeah.
share and what you're not is an act of discernment. That's an act of self-kindness. So I so appreciate you having me here. And I'll start, actually, it was, there are no coincidences, just like you finding my show and then
Correct.
finding your show and having light bulb moment
Hmm.
after light bulb moment about, similar to you, right? Even though our
Hmm.
backgrounds are so different, our conclusions are the same, right?
Oh, I
And there's
love that. Yes,
many
absolutely.
paths to enlightenment, right? And I think that's where
Mm.
religion limits us, right? When I do believe there's many ascended masters on the planet that have gotten the information that helps to lead to enlightenment and are disseminating that information um, on the planet. But when we become myopic, right, when we can only see one path, that that's where suffering really is born, right? Because there is
Mhm.
no right way to heal, right?
Mhm.
There's no book that can tell you exactly what's right for you. That has to come from within, and it comes from soul searching. So as I said, no coincidences. And this week I was drawn to I decided to take a trip to Target. And this particular Target really holds meaning to me because when I was at the lowest point of my life, which was in 2017, that was when I was having active, daily, loud, intrusive suicidal thoughts, right? It's not what
Mm.
I wanted to be thinking about, but it's all I could hear, right? And it took all of my energy, literally, just to get out of bed and just to function. And there, but I was a mom, right? What choice did I have? My kids were little at that point. They were 3 and 6. And,
Mm.
there was one point I had to go to Target to get a list of things. And I went to this particular Target that I revisited this week. And it's not the one I typically go to. So it's notable that I went there this week when we're having this conversation because I have such a memory of, like, one of my favorite movies is The Wizard of Oz, right? From my childhood. And
Mhm.
there's, the big, um, feature of that movie is it goes from black and white to color, right? And the that particular day in 2017 in the summertime, when my body was in so much pain, because I think people don't understand that about, when you're
Mm.
really suffering, it's not just mental, it's not just emotional, it's
Mhm.
physical. And it to even stand upright felt like I had a monkey on my back. And so as I was like shuffling, hunched over through Target, literally seeing the world through that black and white, like there was no color. Like, how Target's red and white, right? Like I couldn't see the red.
Mhm.
It was just gray. And my thought as I walked around grabbing the items I needed was, I can't believe the people around me think that I'm alive.
Oh wow.
Because
Wow.
I felt dead. I really did. It's like all the light within me had been extinguished. And it was
Mm.
just moving through life not wanting to die, but not having any idea how I could possibly stay.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's the other thing.
Right.
It's again, it's not that you want to be thinking suicidal thoughts. They're very noticeable when when you're in that place. It's the predominant thought, right? And I want to, of course, we want to move through the suffering to the healing, right? So, how did I
Mm-hmm.
get through that? Well, for me, honestly, it was I had to come to another thought loop that brought me to the conclusion that I could not do that. So, as I said, I'm a mom, right? And I came to understand through my healing journey that the reason I was suffering so badly was because of childhood trauma. And I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
recognized, much like you, I hadn't recognized that I had been through trauma. I would have described my childhood as quite normal, which looking back really is
Mm-hmm.
sick because it was quite dysfunctional. It's just that dysfunction is very normal in our society, right? So what we've
Correct.
normalized is very toxic and very sick. So as a
Mm-hmm.
mom who recognized that I had been through childhood trauma, which was not the worst trauma one can experience, of course, moderate compared to other people's, but certainly very, very impactful. And I had come to a point in my late 30s now where I was barely surviving. If I were to take my own life, well, I would leave my children motherless from suicide. And
Mm.
that trauma is way worse than anything I experienced as a child. Therefore, I would be leaving my children with a suffering worse than I'm experiencing, and I cannot do that to them. And
Mm.
it became this
So,
dead
can I ask
end.
you a question?
Sure.
Um, how was it that you took yourself from that gray feeling like you were already dead inside to that place of recognizing what it would do to your children? Because I have come to know that that's a very difficult, it's an important place for people to get, but it's a very difficult place for people to get when they're in this kind of mindset, because their focus is so much on relief, like needing relief from the
Right.
pain, that they're not able to focus on others outside of themselves. That I've heard very kind, loving parents describe to me that in that moment of such intense emotional pain, their children and their loved ones weren't a part of their thinking. It was such a firm focus on the pain and the need for relief. So, do you know how you got
Well,
out of that and got to that
I
place?
will say I have had layers upon layers upon layers of privilege in even healing that allowed me to to intellectualize this in a way, right? And I had access to
Okay.
healing tools that many don't. So I don't judge anybody, including parents, who have made this decision. It's not a decision I believe that anyone comes to lightly. I don't believe it's not the first time you've thought about it. This is something that's been happening for probably decades, right? Or at least much longer than one would suspect. So I want to say that first of all, this is not about judging other parents, but for me, the first step was making that decision. It was simply taking the option for myself off the table, because once
Okay.
I realized that it would be traumatizing to my children, I, it became not an option. And what that practically meant was I decided to stop doing it everyone else's way, because I had been doing it right in the mental health care world for 9 years at that point. I'd been doing talk therapy for 9 years, mostly on a weekly basis. And when I felt that I reached an endpoint with a therapist and we reached our goals, I changed therapists. Like I pursued more, right? I did EMDR, which was helpful for sure. Um, and I started taking medications after my second birth, which was traumatic. And I went from benzodiazepines to, SSRIs and SNRIs, and then ultimately mood stabilizers. And then I was so sick in the summer of 2017, I had stopped working for the first time in my life. And I am not the stay at home mom type, right? So for me,
Neither
not
am I.
working, right? And I just felt like wasn't using my brain, right? So that part was excruciating. And I was in a partial hospitalization program, which is just one step below inpatient. And I was getting worse instead of better. So by making the decision and coming to that, option, it was off the table. I decided to stop doing it everybody else's way. So we can talk about that more. I know you have to go to break here. So
And so you have your own show, so you know absolutely how this works.
I know how this
We
works.
do have to go to a break, but I would love to start in our next segment by talking about, you did mention that you had trauma, maybe not as much trauma as other people. And I'd love to start with that statement because I really want to get into,
It's a big one.
the damage that could be done when we compare and we
Exactly.
devalue or invalidate our own traumatic experiences. But you're right, we have to take a break. You're watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television. We'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick, Wednesdays 7 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave Media Network and TuneIn Radio. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to EasySense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's EasySense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Welcome back to Talks with Tracy, coming to you live on Bold Brave Television Network. I have the pleasure today of visiting with Kat Schwartz, who is a fellow podcaster on Bold Brave Television, and she is sharing her experience and suffering all the way through to healing. And in the last segment, you did mention briefly, you talked about how it's such a similar experience to me, how you really didn't feel like you had a lot of trauma in your childhood until you brought your awareness around to your own experience of trauma in childhood, and very much the same for me. And you did say that maybe you didn't have as much trauma as others. And I just want to take a moment to unpack that a little bit, because you and I know, agree that when there's a lot of people who get stuck in that place and kind of devalue their own experience and um, fail to recognize the impact of trauma on their life. And it's important, from my opinion, to recognize that all trauma is a person's own experience. And maybe the exact same things didn't happen as others, and we can look at somebody else and say, oh my gosh, they had it so much worse. But it's really about how it impacts you, how the trauma impacts you. It's also about the support that you get around the trauma, and so we're all impacted by our own experiences. And I believe, Kat, you said that not giving true value to the impact your trauma had on you was part of what kept you stuck in your
Yeah.
healing. Or
Big time. You're very astute to pick up on it, because this is such an important point to unpack, that it's actually what inspired the name of the book I have yet to write, but named long ago, which is called It Could Have Been Worse. right? Because it could have been worse. This idea that what I had been through, yeah, it was bad, but it wasn't as bad as what other people have gone through, really kept me stuck and it kept me sick. And my favorite analogy is just because you're drowning in 7 feet of water versus 20 feet of water doesn't make you less dead, right? So
It's a
by
great analogy.
by allowing myself to, and it was a psychiatrist ultimately that had to validate what I had been through, right? I was gaslighting myself and being gaslit by all the people around me into thinking that I had it so good, that I was really selfish to complain about my childhood or even my marriage, right? That I was so
Well, and
lucky.
people will often say, you don't have it that bad. Look at these people, but you really don't have anything
and,
to.
and and it started to feel like what it really is, which is just another tool of control and invalidation, right? And normalizing sickness, right? Just because something is feels normal or comfortable to you doesn't mean it's healthy, right? Or the people around you, well intentioned, do they have your best interests at heart? Do their interactions and words and behaviors feel loving, or is love just a word they use to keep you attached to them, right? So this we talked about, in our little pre-show meeting, about how isolating this experience is, right? Because it does require you to really stand up and say, what I've been through, regardless of whether there was intention to harm, the impact is real. Right? A lack of intention doesn't negate impact. And
Correct.
unfortunately for me, my healing journey has largely required me to let go of of all the people who were invalidating what I had been through, who were trying to, I think as Brene Brown says, silver line it, right? Like, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, it could have been worse, right? And you know, and but the other but the more hopeful side of it could have been worse, right? Is for those of us who have been impacted by trauma that's on the more moderate or even mild side, right? I mean, there are traumas that just because they aren't you know huge events, right? I found it so interesting on a show I previously did on another network with a friend of mine. It was an 8 episode arc that we called Even We Know That. We interviewed a man I admire so much. He goes by the Consciously on social media, and we gave the ACEs quiz to him online, and that's the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire. And I'm proud
Mm-hmm.
to be on the New Jersey Education Association State Task Force for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So I have been educated in the public health crisis of that is trauma. And when we gave George Lee the questionnaire on air, he had a 10 out of 10 score, right? He had been through every single thing on that list, and it includes the worst kinds of abuses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that he really reflected upon after we gave him that quiz was how he never felt loved and special in his family. And no matter how many sports games that he did and how victorious he was at sports, not a single one of his family members ever attended his games. And that really stuck with him. And I just thought that was so interesting, right? In a
Mm-hmm.
lifetime of abuse, to really reflect upon the fact that you just didn't feel seen and heard, that's trauma. Right? And
Yes.
it's trauma that's laughed at. It's trauma that's delegitimized, right? Like, we're old enough to have heard children are seen and not heard, right? Or it's irresponsible to blame your parents. It's not about blaming your parents. It's about being honest about the past. And not
Correct. Correct.
sugarcoating, not sugarcoating trauma, especially once it's reached the point where you're literally suffering and contemplating leaving Earth, right? That's when it's time to make radical decisions, right? And radical
Mm-hmm.
changes. I obviously didn't end my life, but I damn sure ended the life that I was living. And I wouldn't be alive today if I hadn't.
Wow. And so you said that um, one of the pivotal moments for you was when a psychiatrist
Yeah.
shifted the what you were being diagnosed with and what was happening for you to focus on the trauma that you had. A diagnosis is more related to trauma, which allowed you to say, yes, I've been traumatized, and yes, I'm impacted by this. And by that, that was a moment where you then kind of by the powers that be were given permission to go deeper within, from a place of treating symptoms to going to core injuries. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I had been diagnosed as bipolar. So one of the reasons that I was suicidal is because I was being told that I had to take these horrific mood stabilizers for the rest of my life. And these medications were worse than the symptoms they were treating. And while I had absolutely my mental health started, I mean, I was first diagnosed, I would have described my mental health as normal, even though it was anything but. I lived with depression and anxiety since I was 6 years old. I've lived with hypomania since I was a preteen. It's how I got through a 4.0 through graduate school. I was able to just study all night, right? Like, so looking back, I had a lot of mental health issues, but I was calling myself normal. But once I became a parent, that mask slipped, that facade slipped for me, because I started honestly mirroring the behaviors of my mother, who had been quite abusive. I mean, more on the verbal and emotional scale, but abusive nonetheless. So that's when I started being diagnosed as postpartum depression, and then after the traumatic birth of my son, postpartum anxiety. And then ultimately I had a full 6-day manic episode, which is how I got the diagnosis of bipolar. But the same psychiatrist then, who after a couple of months started, she was trying to be helpful with the medication she was prescribing. But once I was really honest with her that everything I tried was making things worse instead of better, that the suicidal thoughts were louder than ever, even though I was in the partial hospitalization program, that's when she really sat down with me and she said, you know what, listening to your story, I don't even think bipolar is the right diagnosis. Like, I think you have complex PTSD. And I was said, and what now? I've never heard of that, right? And there's a reason we haven't heard of it. It's because it's not even in the DSM yet, right? The gold standard of psychiatric diagnoses, right? But complex PTSD is what the ACEs score speaks to, right? Those adverse childhood experiences, those things that occurred in childhood when your nervous system was developing, and therefore by definition your nervous system didn't develop normally, right? We can call that neurodivergence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when
Right.
you're neurodivergent, living in a world that's normal, that is not friendly, right, to anything outside of the norm, right, whatever that means, and is actively, these systems aren't in place by accident, right? The systems that keep people who are, quote unquote, mentally ill, stigmatized and marginalized, and put in a very specific box, right? um it's by design, right? And the amount of hand over fist money being made by these pharmaceutical companies and these insurance companies, right? And we've seen that from the inside, as healthcare workers, right? And what is
Right.
required, for billing these insurance companies, right? And that's all by very much by design, right? So it's another piece to why this healing path is so difficult, because you're not just fighting the individuals in your life, you're really fighting the system. And the more of
Right.
us
And
that
the system is in place. It feels like it's in place to keep us keep us sick, consistently sick. Like Band-Aid
so they can tell
effect,
us the solution,
treat symptoms. Yeah, rather than
right?
getting to the core and really
Absolutely.
healing, so you don't suffer anymore. I
No,
totally
and
agree.
that's very much by design, right? I mean, that's not an accident. And the more of us that name it and say it out loud and are willing to offer, hope and alternatives that are evidence based, right? We're not talking things, even the things that you and I practice and believe in that are more on the woo side of things, like hypnotherapy for you and Reiki for me. I mean, there's evidence there, and we've seen it in our own lives, or we wouldn't have pursued it. Right? Like,
Correct.
I spoke in my last show about how me being attuned to Reiki was so incredibly magical and added so much to my abilities as a physical therapist that 3 years later, I ultimately left physical therapy to pursue it full time. Right. So, while they're less, when you're on my show in 2 hours, I'm going to call it the road less traveled. Right. Like, even though these paths are less traveled, that doesn't mean that they're ineffective. They're actually quite effective. And the people and the systems and the corporations that are selling you the solution don't want you to know that they're actually quite accessible. And a lot of them are even free, like meditation, for instance. Right.
Right, absolutely. And natural, no side effects, all of those things. And, I've often said that they're called alternative methods of healing, but they shouldn't be the alternative. They should be, like
They should be the
the
first line of defense.
primary, the
I
first
mean,
line of defense. Yes.
it's crazy to me that we give pills to children instead of meditation, right? Like, rather than detention, what about meditation, right? Like, there's just simple fixes that would make ginormous, it's not even a word, but I'm gonna use it anyway, ginormous impact.
Yes. So it's already time to cut to a commercial, but when we come back, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you got to that awakening moment and made that shift into your other career path, the career path that fit, more personally and spiritually for you, and then also about some of the things that happen when we do true healing and stop people pleasing and things like that. But first, we have to take a commercial break. You're watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television. We'll be right back.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality? But it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating. Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like, it was almost instant. Like, I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic on the BBM Global Network, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back to Talks with Tracy, coming to you live on Bold Brave Television Network. I am here with Kat Schwartz. Thank you so much for sharing all that you're sharing with us today. I'm so thankful for that. It really means a lot to me that you're here. And, you were talking about some of the traditional medical model treatments for mental health issues that weren't effective for you, you tried for years extensively to heal within that medical model, and it just didn't work for you. It didn't help. And then, you had a psychiatrist who acknowledged that your trauma experience and shifted your healing process essentially into another direction. Can you talk about that and kind of lead up to that awakening that you had?
Yeah, happily. So the other thing what the diagnosis of complex PTSD did for me, and what that doctor also, psychiatrist also did for me, was legitimize my use of cannabis as medicine. Because when I honestly, said to her, well, I'm taking all the medications that you're prescribing, but the only relief I ever feel is when I smoke cannabis. And she said, that actually makes sense, because cannabis is a legitimate trauma treatment. In fact, with this diagnosis, I can get you a medical marijuana card, because that was the only way at the time to access cannabis in New Jersey. Now it's recreational, and I think that's wonderful, because these plant medicines are here to help us, right? I'm not saying that cannabis is for everybody. I'm certainly not saying that at all. For me, it really was life-saving. It helped me to safely wean off all the other medications, because I remember, there was a time where Xanax was the only thing that was allowing me really to function as a parent and to even go to Target, right? It was because I had taken a Xanax. Well, when I discovered that benzodiazepines are so dangerous that just the withdrawal alone can kill you, and I realized that I was dependent on these things. I mean, that's terrifying, right? I mean, cannabis has never killed a single soul, right? So it's time to stop demonizing these plants that are here, I believe God put here to help us. And what that also allowed me to do, because I had already, started a path to healing that was a little bit on the alternative side, at least in the form of intuitive eating, which is something I was introduced to in 2015. I speak a whole episode about that on my own podcast. And then I became a yoga teacher in 2016, because yoga was just helping me to feel better. Like, I wasn't looking at it as a spiritual practice. It was just something that, especially the more yin and meditative styles of yoga, were really, really helpful for my anxiety. And, it was felt like something I could supplement my physical therapy career with, because I was an atheist. I had been raised Catholic. But when my dad died when I was 21, right around the time where some really disgusting truths came out about the Catholic Church, my faith died with him. And I spent the next 18 years as a very proud atheist, very scientifically minded. And at no point in my healing journey was I seeking out God or spirituality. I was just trying to feel better. So in doing and opening my mind to intuitive eating, and then yoga, and then cannabis, and then the fact that I had trauma at all, and really healing that trauma. And I did a whole year of dialectical behavior therapy skills training, which is fantastic. And that led me to November of 2018, when a spirit medium was being hosted at my yoga studio. And I was very offended by that. And I tell the whole story in the last episode I did. But that day was so impactful, because the medium that I met, through what he said to me, what I felt. So like, for instance, when he came into the room, after his assistant said that he was praying to the angels, I was looking around the whole circle like, is anyone else buying this crap? This is ridiculous, right? And when he walked in the room, it was as though the top of my head was removed, and I felt a shower of intense energy flood into my body, to the point where I was crying and sweating, and using all my yoga skills just to get through it. And then he told this really relatable story about struggling with addiction, which is something I've struggled with, both with alcohol and even vaping cannabis. Um, you know, I've struggled with that. So there were a lot of things that he said that were very relatable. And then he reconnected to me, to my father and my grandfather, in such a concrete way. It left absolutely no room for doubt in my mind that I wasn't speaking to my dad, right? And that he had been aware of me for this whole 18 years. And because the medium saw something in me, actually the first thing he said to me was, when we touched hands, he said, "Wow, do you do Reiki?" And I said, "No, I'm a physical therapist and a yoga teacher." He goes, "No, you're a healer like me, and you could do what I do." And after then, that intense experience, it was an awakening. And I really understood that what I was calling mental illness was really spiritual giftedness. And this super high vibrational energy that they were calling mania was really yes, it was extremely high vibrational energy, but if I could ground it and integrate it, I could actually utilize that gift. And that's exactly what I've been able to do through Reiki, and the development and really discovery of my own spiritual giftedness. I do my work exclusively now as a Reiki master of masters, a spirit medium. I do have my own very unique style of mediumship that I call spiritual
Mm-hmm.
private investigation. And I have an amazing friend and client from that work. The mother of Nicole Schmidt, who's the mom of Gabby Petito, who's a murder victim, well known, and her mom does a lot of work around domestic violence. But yeah, my life today looks absolutely nothing like it used to, both personally and professionally. And all of those decisions not only took a lot of courage, but they literally saved my life. So, yeah, I'm happy to
Yes,
talk.
absolutely. Can you just mention when you do healing like that and you literally like heal yourself and come out your true authentic self, a healthy, this healthy, beautiful version of yourself? Can you tell me how the people in your life responded to that? Because in my own experience, I really had to be willing to let go of a lot of people and make huge changes in my life that were super uncomfortable and were not received well by people who I then had to let go.
No, the answer is not well. Not well at all. I mean, there were honestly two parts to my suicidality. The first one was being diagnosed as bipolar, told I had to take these really awful medications for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
And then the other part was I was being bullied to death by my best friends of 20 years. You know, these women that I had invested 20 years of friendship, you know, once I stop people pleasing, right? Once I took, I started to slowly and painfully realize that these women had never loved me. They loved what I did for them. They loved the friend that I was to them. And when I was in need of friendship and care, there was none of that for me. There was just judgment, and there was terrible rumors and gossip and lies, and you know interfering in my marriage. And it was just, and you can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. Right. And
Mm.
when I really understood, so to answer your question, I mean, I don't have any relationship with my family. My parents are both gone now. My mom passed away in September. I have no, real relationship with my only sibling, who was a terrible bully to me, up and through and including through our mother's death and funeral. um my family doesn't speak to me. I'm the proverbial black sheep. I'm divorced from my children's father, and we do have a civil relationship, and there's no bad blood there. But no, I mean, I lost about 13 friends, I think, in one single year, and
Mm.
it felt almost unsurvivable. But as I said, for the reasons, because I was a mom and I came to that conclusion. I mean, they were my focus, and I wouldn't be alive without them. But I'd so much rather on the other side of that be alone than be in shitty company. I mean, it's not even a contest for me, at this point. I enjoy my alone time. I think that's really what healing is about. It's like just coming back to that self-love and that self-acceptance,
Mhm.
and realizing that when you treat yourself the way you deserve to be treated, you will attract people into your life that do the same. Right. And I heard you say that
Oh,
on your show, that
yes. Oh, I love that.
I totally agree that you teach other people how to treat you. And up until I was
Mhm.
38 years old, I didn't treat myself well at all. And how could I expect other people to treat me well? Right. And now at 45 years old,
Mhm.
it's been a journey, but I'm very happy with the small trusted circle of people that I have in my life.
Aw, I love that. I find myself in that very same feeling and belief. And there's a quote that you told me when we were preparing for this show, and I want to I want to say it, and I want to say it as a reminder for myself, and I want to say it for my sisters, Martha and Hiccups. This is like for the three of us, right? And what you said was, stop setting yourself on fire to keep people warm who wouldn't even piss on you to put it out.
I did say that. I did say
You
that.
did
Then
say that.
you're not lying. Yeah, I mean, and sometimes you need to put it in those terms, right? And to kind of jar yourself and shock yourself, because as givers, people are, we're so used to not receiving, even close to what we give in return. But when you realize you're getting breadcrumbs from someone who deserves, needs to give you a 5-course meal, right? And you set a new boundary and you set a new standard. Well, people either rise to meet that or they fall away, and either one is okay. you have to
Either one
you have
is okay.
either one is
Yes.
okay.
That I totally agree with that. So once again, it's time to take a commercial break. But when we come back, um, we're going to do our final segment and have some final thoughts from you. So please join us, everyone, for that. We will be back in a few minutes.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick, Wednesdays 7 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave Media Network and TuneIn Radio. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to EasySense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's EasySense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them. Rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies. Find settings that allow them to be the most productive and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Welcome back to Talks with Tracy, coming to you live on the Bold Brave Television Network. I've had the pleasure of talking to Kat Schwartz today. I'm so very thankful to have had this time with you. I do want to take a moment, Kat, to thank you for something that you did earlier this week for me when we were preparing for this show. So it was totally unexpected, and it was very meaningful and just a healing moment for me. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to tell everybody what it was. So you just gave me this truly beautiful gift of through your mediumship. And at the end of our talk, you took out your deck of cards and you said that there were messages for me. And there were messages from two very, very dear people in my life who actually left this world via suicide. And you gave me these messages and they were so very helpful to me and, moving forward in my healing. So I kind of went back and forth about whether or not I was going to share the message, but I'm feeling like I need to because I'm feeling like it might be helpful for other people who have been left in the world after a loved one has committed suicide. So one of the messages that you pulled was for me was it was a card plan in it. I don't know if you recall that, but basically what the message for me was from my loved one that their exit from this world had been planned before they ever came to this world. And therefore there was nothing I could do to stop it or prevent it, which had such meaning for me because being left behind, so to speak, it's complex grief. Just like you talked about complex trauma, After somebody is suicided in your life, there's complex grief that goes along with it. There's all this stuff about, I should have known. How did I not know? What could I have done to prevent it? If I had only been there, all of these things. So that message from my loved one that said there's nothing I could have done to prevent it was super meaningful for me. And then the message from my other loved one who committed suicide was, it was a picture of this beautiful tree with a heart in the trunk of the tree. And basically the message was that it was time for me to move on past that grief, because that person is always with me in my heart. And isn't it true that, like you said yourself in that one session that you went to where the person connected you with your dad, they're always with us. And that
Oh
has
yeah.
such meaning for me. So thank you for that.
Well, you're so welcome. It's a pleasure. It's just one of the beautiful parts of my job. And it does really help with grief to realize that your loved one is not gone, right? Is their body got gone? Of course, right? So is their ego, which is a great thing, right? And what's left is their essence, is their soul, it's that eternal part of them. And they're the veil, if I even, the veil is gone, right? The veil between realms is gone. I mean, our loved ones have never before been able to as easily connect with us, right? Whether it's specific signs and synchronicities, or lights turning on and off in the house and things of that nature, right? Or finding pennies on the ground, whatever it is, feathers, things of that nature. These are truly, really from your loved ones. And when you learn their languages, which is what I do, I part of my private investigation, the reason I call it that is because I find spirits where they are now, which is in the environment, right? And spirits are fantastic at showing me tangible evidence, whether that's through license plates or, screenshots, things I'm listening to, signs I get outwardly from nature. Once I have context for them, once a person's provided me the context for their loved one, I can very effectively provide evidence that shows you the language of spirit, right? Because what blocks us from reconnecting with our loved ones is that very grief, right? That grief is what's blocking the heart chakra, because it's fundamentally a misunderstanding. Our loved ones are still very, very present with us. I love to say that they're not sitting on a cloud waiting for us to die. They're right here, right now with you in this moment, trying so hard to get your attention. So you realize they're really there, and you start to live. You start to live the life your soul intended, right? You stop people pleasing. You let go of the toxic BS, in whatever form that is, whether it's relationships or habits or substances. And you just start tapping back into that purpose. And that is what our loved ones are waiting for. That is what our ancestors are waiting for, right? Is for our awakening. And I will spend the rest of my career facilitating those moments of healing, because they're real and they're powerful. And as
Yes.
it did for me in November of 2018, I've never looked back. I've never ever doubted that the people I've lost or have never left me, right? Since 2018. Prior to 2018, I was clueless, and it sucked. It really sucked,
Yeah.
because I've lost a lot of people in my life. That void was big, and to be able to fill that with the actual essence and soul of who that person is just such a gift.
Thank you. It was such a gift. And I shared it with my family members, and it was a gift to them as well. So thank you for that. So now, Kat, on your show, you like to end your show with 5 things you know so far. And I was going to invite you to do that to end our show today. Some of the take home points that
Yes.
you'd like
So
us to leave with.
I would love to. So, spoiler alert: Tracy will be on my show at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we're gonna have a very different conversation. We're gonna have a very different conversation, but I am gonna end with most of what's on the list. But since one of them is more relevant to that conversation, I'm just gonna start with number 1: that your loved ones are still with you, no, regardless of the manner of death. Your loved ones, the soul essence of who they are always with you. They're always present with you, and they're trying to get your attention. So ask for specific signs and open yourself up to receive them and really start to prove that to yourself. The second thing I want to say is that pain in life is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering results when we do not acknowledge the reality of our situation. Unconditional acceptance is a key first step towards relieving suffering. The root cause of all diseases are blocked energies, repressed emotions, and unhealed traumas. Emotional healing is absolutely necessary for resolving both mental and physical conditions. Choosing to heal is a very lonely and isolating experience. The loneliness in and of itself can cause you to seek people, places, and things that are not for your highest good. Rather, seek the support of like-minded people. And then lastly, our current healthcare model prioritizes profits over people and symptom management over healing, which is why it is so ineffective. And I
Beautiful.
took
Thank you
those
so
from,
much.
and I just want to say I took those from the things that you and I really agree upon. So
Yes,
we'll have another
totally agree.
conversation shortly.
So just very quickly, how can people find you? You have your own show.
Yes, I host That's All I Know So Far. It premieres at 1 p.m. Eastern right on Bold Brave TV on Thursdays, so join us in just an hour. You can find me at Cat Schwarz, there's no T, catschwarz.com, and my email is cat@chsyoga.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at catschwarz_CHS.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to being on your show really soon, very soon.
Yes,
And
we'll see you very soon.
thank you everyone for watching today. I appreciate and send love to each and every one of you that view this. And I will be on vacation next week, but I will be back on June 27th, and I will be talking about the beautiful healing powers of our minds. And one of my favorite topics, hypnotherapy. So please join me for that. Until then, this has been Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. I'll see you next time. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
This has been Talks with Tracy. Join us each week as Tracy and her guests will come together and realize that underneath it all, we are all the same and never alone. So join us each week and let Talks with Tracy be your safe place to land in your healing journey. Right here, Thursdays, 11 a.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.